Julie Stern is an internationally recognized teacher, trainer, keynote speaker, curriculum designer, and author. Julie is passionate about synthesizing the best of education research into practical tools that support educators in breaking free of the industrial model of schooling and moving toward teaching and learning that promotes sustainability, equity, and well-being. She is the best-selling author of Learning That Transfers, Visible Learning for Social Studies, and Tools for Teaching Conceptual Understanding, Elementary and Secondary. She is the thought leader behind the global workshop series, Making Sense of Learning Transfer, and is a certified trainer in Visible Learning Plus. Julie is a James Madison Constitutional Fellow and taught social studies for many years in Washington, D.C. and her native Louisiana. Kayla Duncan is a personalized instruction coach for Forsyth County Schools in Cumming, Georgia. Her passion centers around empowering student voice through meaningful, authentic experiences and increased ownership. Before her coaching role, Kayla taught elementary physical education and middle school mathematics. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology from the University of Georgia, a Master of Arts in Mathematics Education from Western Governors University, and an educational specialist in learning design and technology from the University of Georgia. Kayla is pursuing a Doctor of Education in School Improvement from the University of West Georgia and hopes to use this new knowledge to propel schools toward innovative visions for education. Trevor Aleo is a middle school English teacher in Wilton, Connecticut. Prior to his current position, he taught high school and was a grade level lead in Prince William County, Virginia. In addition to leading teams at his own school, he's drafted curriculum at the district level, created instructional resources for the Virginia Department of Education, and has presented at local, state, and national conferences. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in English and a Master of Arts in Teaching from James Madison University, and is currently pursuing a doctorate in learning design and leadership at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And now, let's get started. So I'll turn this over to Julie, Kayla, and Trevor.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Hello, everybody. Wow, great to see so many people from across the United States, Canada, and other parts of the world. We've got New Zealand and Australia also live. I'm super excited to be here. Let's jump right in. So if you guys could, there should be a little blue ability to click on that in the chat to be able to hit panelists and attendees. So in the chat, if you could hit panelists and attendees, that way all attendees could see what you're saying, because there's so many people who are saying stuff just to us, just to the panelists. But if you could, which of these is a priority for you? So put number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 in chat. So are you hoping for students to be self-directed learners? Are you really into equity? What about innovation or critical thinking? So lots of numbers coming in. So far, I've seen Kayla and Trevor. I don't know if you said, somebody said 1 through 4. I've seen every number so far. So very cool to see so many things. I think, I don't know if we could say there's like a top vote going on here, because there's a lot of all categories coming there. Maybe number 4, critical thinking might be one of them. Someone says, how do you choose? Love it, love it. Really wonderful to see that all of these are important to you all, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. How does focusing on transfer, building a culture of transfer, help our students become lifelong learners, really harness equity, giving all students equal access to opportunities? How can we help our students become innovators to solve the world's hairiest problems? And how can we foster critical thinking? So all of those things we're going to hopefully address in this 1-hour session today. And so this is what I believe, to the bottom of my toes, the single most powerful way, overall way, we can upgrade our teaching is to plan backwards from what? From students' ability to transfer their learning to new situations. Now, this is not easy, but we have been knee-deep in every piece of research we can possibly get our hands on to find out how can we plan backwards from students' ability to transfer their learning to new situations. So that's what we'll be sharing with all of you. What is transfer? First, I want to define this. Transfer is simply using our previous learning or knowledge or experiences to understand or unlock a completely new situation. So how can we help our students transfer their learning from one lesson to the next, from 1 week to the next, maybe from one class to another class, and then to the real world, to future years, to future units that we're teaching? That's what we're all about. How do we help our young people transfer their learning to new situations? And we all want this, right? We want our young people to study World War II, not only to remember the dates and the battles and the names and all of these things, but so that they can hopefully prevent another world's global conflict. This is what we're trying to do. So how do we do that? And so that's what we're all about. So we're going to start off with this question. We're going to take them one at a time, and I'll try to go slow because I have a problem of going too fast. How does structure impact transfer? So we're trying to model all of the things we want you all to do with students. So how does structure impact transfer? We love this quote from Jerome Bruner, who says, he said this is from 1977, was the second edition of his book. So he originally said this in 1960. 1960 was the first edition of his book. Grasping the structure of a subject is understanding it in a way that permits many other things to be related to it meaningfully. We love this quote. It's in all of my books because it really gets at what we have to do with our young people. Help them to grasp the structure of mathematics, the structure of science, etc., so that they can relate many other things to it. And that's what we'll be talking about today. So like I said, we've been doing so much research. At the height of the pandemic, we came up with this nifty little mental model that we call the ACT model. And Kayla's going to explain to you all what this is.
Hi, yeah. So we know that we can't toss students into a situation and say, go get it. We need them to be able to connect their ideas and connect their thoughts. And they first do this by understanding individual concepts at a deep level. And this is where they're acquiring their understanding. And in this framework, we're really working for students to see the critical attributes of those concepts and make sure that they understand them individually. And then we give them a really good context and some conceptual questions to help students connect those concepts or skills in relationship. They're building the schema. They're really seeing how all of these different pieces work together. And then we want to give them a new situation where they can transfer their understanding. And so this very simple framework is what we're using to model our curriculum, unit designs, and lesson designs. And students are going from acquire to connect to transfer iteratively throughout a unit. And it's really helping them see the structure of our disciplines and how they can apply their learning to new situations.
Awesome. Yeah, we're going to take you guys through all of this and share tons of resources that are on our website. You don't have to buy the book in order to get access to these free resources. So Trevor's going to take us through some visuals that really help us to sort of see what it is that we're trying to do with our young people.
Yeah, so because the notion of concepts is pretty abstract, we like to create some visuals that can help make it a little bit more concrete. So whenever we're encountering new things in the world, we have a tendency to pay attention to the superficial features of that thing. But when we start looking for shared attributes across specific situations, objects, or contexts, we can start to notice certain patterns that help us lead to understanding concepts and thinking conceptually. So for instance, if we give students a bunch of claims to look at if we're teaching persuasive writing, we need to help them see past whatever the content of that claim is and begin to notice the shared attributes across each of the claims. They're all concise, they all take a position on a topic, etc. So helping students notice those shared attributes is how we can get them to see concepts. So we're kind of evolving and moving beyond the idea of concepts only being timeless, universal, and abstract ideas. For us, when we aren't thinking conceptually in more contextual or more discipline-specific ways, we can kind of lose out on some of the affordances of thinking conceptually. So we characterize concepts as organizing ideas with distinct attributes that are shared across multiple examples. So for our students, we just sort of say words that we can use to categorize our world. So anytime there are facts or examples or specific instances of something, they all can sort of fit into a conceptual file folder. So we use that file folder analogy really distinctly because it's really easy for students to get all of the facts and topics jumbled in their head as we're teaching. And concepts, like file folders, give them a place to store that new information. So for instance, when we are introducing students to the elements of a story, helping them understand that whether we're talking about individuals versus society or individual versus nature, really all of these are examples of conflict. Helping them understand that even though Juliet and Sula Peace and Star Carter are all different characters within a text, there's certain moves that authors make in order to characterize them, in order to flesh them out and give them life. So how can they understand that concept of character across multiple texts? Similarly, how can authors, what similar and different moves do they make to establish a setting, whether that setting is Harlem or Hogwarts? So they're looking across text and always thinking about how does the setting sort of impact the meaning of the piece? And then finally, thinking about all the different themes that exist across texts. So students aren't necessarily just understanding one story, but a theme that can extend and exist across multiple stories. The real magic, though, comes in once students begin considering the relationship between these concepts. So once they've started categorizing and recognizing and identifying conflict, characters, settings, and themes within a text, it's asking them, how do those things interact? How does the setting help the author or creator establish a theme in a piece? How does the conflict between characters ultimately move the plot forward? So it's understanding those complex conceptual relationships that give students really deep, nuanced understanding. So a visual that sort of brings all those pieces together that we've designed is this idea of when students are introduced to examples, having them pay attention to the specific unique details of that situation, of that text, or of that example. And then once they've started filing those in their respective conceptual folder, asking students to consider how those concepts work together. And going back to Julie's essential question, helping them see those deep structural patterns that don't just exist in one context, but in multiple contexts. So they're really able to not just understand one situation, but see the deeper patterns and structures that undergird many situations or texts or examples.
Awesome. So this is what we're trying to do. And this is sort of the meta move, the thinking move that we all need to be making as teachers so that we can teach it to our students. How do we look at a new situation and see those deeper structural patterns? So we're going to practice that right now. So what is the role of concepts when we face new situations? So I just looked in the news and found something that's happening in the news right now that's really pertinent. I see we have some people from Florida, near Tampa, actually, in our chat right now. And so this is something really pertinent to you all. But what is the role of concepts when we face new situations? And so here's what we'll do is we'll go through this. And somebody says, can you give an example? We've got not only some of our core team in here. I know we've got Nichelle Pinckney, we've got Julia Briggs, Natalie Loriot, Erin Lininger. We also have Martin Tremblay. We have some of our extended team in the chat. We have Max Fox. Who else do we have? We have Matthew Webb. I see you guys all in there. They're going to be leading this and helping you all. And I know many of you who are also on here have experience with concepts. So I want us to sort of think about what are some concepts that we see in this news story. So toxic wastewater is currently leaking into Tampa Bay. And so I'm just going to play a 2-minute news clip. If you've never heard of this before, no problem. Think about what concepts, what organizing ideas do you see? So an example of a non-concept would be Florida. That's not a concept because it's not an organizing idea. A state would be more of a concept. Okay, so I'm going to play this video and I want you all to think about what concepts you see here in this video. Excellent. We got Julia Briggs. Did I mention Julia Briggs? She's our science specialist, so hopefully she'll lead the way.
An emergency pumping operation is underway in Manatee County at the Piney Point gypsum stack. The decommissioned stack has more than 400 million gallons of highly contaminated water at the top. Managers of the stack have recently detected a leak, and they're trying to avert a major failure at this point. 8 on your side's Jeff Patterson joining us live from Manatee County with more details on this. Jeff.
Good evening, Keith. This phosphogypsum stack has been here since the 1960s, but that newly detected leak is causing major concerns. This is what the top of the phosphogypsum stack looks like from Eagle 8 HD. Several cells of highly contaminated wastewater that have been collecting here for years. Now, a newly detected leak is causing concerns that there could be a breach of the stack, sending millions of gallons of wastewater into the surrounding area.
What happens when that thing tears loose and comes down Bud Road? What happens to our drinking water?
Managers of the site are currently pumping down the wastewater to find the leak. Ada McPherson has lived here her entire life and says that's not a good idea either.
And that's wrong, letting it out into the Gulf. What about the environment out there, the fish and all of that?
Justin Bloom with the Sarasota Waterkeepers agrees.
Right now, they're discharging into Piney Point Creek. Any amount of this water that goes to surface waters and into Tampa Bay is bad.
It's a problem that Glenn Compton with Minnesota 88 has been warning about for many years.
There is no economically feasible or environmentally sound way to close this stack. There's going to be a price to be paid. Hopefully it's not going to be done by total annihilation of the environment of the surrounding area, but that's a real possibility.
Glenn Compton says the private company that owns this gypsum stack has filed for bankruptcy in the past. He says if they cannot manage this leak, it may fall to the federal EPA to clean it up or to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection to clean it up, and that could cost taxpayers millions of dollars. Live in Manatee County, Jeff Patterson, 8 on your side.
It's kind of a weird phenomenon that I'm doing. I'm watching this news story, which is kind of sad, but I'm like smiling because you guys are coming up with really great concepts in the chat. It's amazing what you all are putting in here. Very cool. So yeah, there's different levels of abstraction, somebody just said. And so this is something that we put together yesterday, just sort of thinking about this. Nichelle Pinckney is our social studies expert. And so we were thinking, what are some concepts that are at play here? Authority, power, laws, regulations, safety. And so ultimately what we want is for students to connect those concepts in relationship. So you can see here that this student was thinking about laws and regulations sometimes come into conflict. So there's like a negative equal sign with jobs in the economy, and wrote safety as part of freedom, connected those two and put an exclamation points there. So really this is the way that we can grasp the structure of a subject by thinking about what concepts are there and talking about how those concepts interact. So acquire understanding of individual concepts, connect them in relationship, and those connections are what facilitate transfer. So keep coming in. All these things you guys are putting in there. We're just going to pop up a few more examples from the 4 core disciplines about how all of these concepts are at play here. So Kayla's going to lead us through this one for mathematics.
Absolutely. This was so much fun to brainstorm, and we had some great discussions about it. So we thought students should be able to model, because using models can help calculate risk and make decisions in emergency situations. That's what someone might do if they're working in an environmental situation or job. And then some of the concepts from math, we saw volume with the sub-concepts of length, width, depth, quantity, how much water is there in the pit and the pool, what's the rate of the leak. I saw someone mention that in the chat. Can we create a function for this rate? And function actually brought up a good conversation, because depending on the age of the students, they might be thinking about functions, but if it's more advanced math and this is spanning out in kind of a circle and going through like a diameter, then a function wouldn't work. And so that's just a great example of how you can scale this to meet the needs of your students. You can take this up or down to hit any sort of level of math. And then we brought in statistics. What's the risk of actually being infected or impacted by this? And we can even look at the area. What's the total area of the evacuation site, and what's the total area of impact? And so the quantity of the water could inform the rate of release. We can use a function to determine the area of evacuation and impact, which would help us make statistical decisions. That's kind of the overarching idea that students might get out of exploring this context and looking at all these concepts in relationship to each other.
Awesome. And yeah, this is called our BOLT map, which is brainstorm, organize, link, transfer. And it's all available on our website, learningthattransfers.com. It's a companion site for our book. And so we just made this up, kind of playing with it. And Kayla and I went back and forth about these different concepts. And we did this today with the school we're working with. We all zoomed into the school we're working with, and we did breakout sessions with the different disciplines. And we just said, can we do this with everybody, K through 12? all subject areas represented. And what we used was this tool, which is hexagonal thinking. It actually comes from Cult of Pedagogy blog, and we just turned it into a little template. But this is for science. And we had teachers make this where you can move these little hexagons around, and because there's 6 sides, you can talk about how all the concepts are related. And so I made this yesterday, just brainstorming it, and I sent it over to Julia Briggs, my science specialist, and I had radioactive under solubility here in displacement, and she said, oh, you know, it created this really cool conversation where she said, actually, I would move radioactive in between environment and living things, and of course, sickness, death, decay, and death. So there's no one right way to do this, and it almost shows the level of expertise kind of moves the concepts around in interesting ways. But this is the idea, is that we all can see this situation. We can use the skills and the concepts of different disciplines to access it and to have our young people think about what concepts are at play. So of course, we can't leave out English language arts. Trevor's going to share this one with you guys.
Yeah, so at first glance, there might be an assumption that this is a very STEM-oriented interdisciplinary unit. But when you start asking students to consider the ways that perspective can impact storytelling, they can really dig into the human aspect of this tragedy. Thinking about how the author, audience, and message is going to impact the meaning, the perception, and the reception of a story, and have them maybe do some empathy work if you're looking at a issue within your local community, of understanding other people's perspectives and seeing how, depending on one's perspective on that issue, depending on their relationship with whatever is happening, they're going to make different design choices with their writing. So they could create a feature piece for a local paper. They could write to a local congressman to figure out ways to design policy that might mitigate these problems from happening in the future. And really think about the way that perspective and storytelling interact and how they can use an understanding of those concepts to actually advocate for improvement.
Awesome. Yeah. And so what happens, why we're so excited about this and we can't even contain it, is this question that we all sort of dread from our students, why do we have to know this, basically goes away. Because we can take news stories and link them directly to what's happening in our classes, to the content of our classes. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we link everything that we're doing to these deeper structural patterns of how the world is organized. So for us today, that was just a real quick kind of example of where we're trying to go with this. Our success criteria for this webinar, we hope that by the end, you will be able to build conceptual organization in order to facilitate transfer of learning. And we hope that you'll be able to use strategies to acquire, connect, and transfer concepts to new situations. So we just went through that quick example. And now what we want to do is sort of take a step back and talk about our sort of curriculum design process so that you guys can have some tools, some concrete tools to walk away with. And so this is the question just sort of framing this particular webinar. We thought about we asked you at the beginning, sort of what are you most interested in? Lifelong learning and students, self-directed learning, equity, innovation, critical thinking. How do all of these things interact with transfer? So be thinking about what your response is to this question, because we're going to come back to it at the end and let you all be able to share in chat. What is your response to this question? How do all these things interact? And so some of you may be familiar with backwards design. Of course, we were inspired by Understanding by Design. I used that for over a decade before I started playing with concept-based curriculum instruction. And so we are thinking about how do we plan backwards, not only from the big ideas or the enduring understandings, but how do we plan backwards from students' abilities to transfer to situations we have not taught them. So not just project-based learning where we've got a cool project and we're doing this really cool thing. Actually, I want my young people to be able to see something where I'm not there and they know what to do. And I never have to be there. That's crazy, but that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to plan backwards from that. And how do we do that? We need our students to construct a web of conceptual connections, otherwise known as schema. So it's not just about one cool project. We want to foster transfer so that our young people can attack something that we have never even seen ourselves. That's what we're aiming for. So what's our acceptable evidence? If you're familiar with Backwards by Design, you think about your desired results, your acceptable evidence. So we come up with transferable success criteria. which is available on our website. And we want our young people to transfer their learning, here's the big part, to a completely novel situation, a situation we haven't taught in class. That's the way that we'll know they're able to transfer to situations when we're not there. And so the learning experiences are, we want to create a path of transfer to increasingly complex scenarios. And we want our young people to attend to the deeper structural patterns of how the world is organized. So this is somewhat of the evolution of our thinking, of definitely mine as I've grown as a curriculum director, in thinking about curriculum design and how do we move towards something that is going to prepare our kids for a changing world. That's what we're all about. And so this is our aha moment last year. You guys remember this? We were texting each other back and forth as we were writing the book, excuse me. And it was so simple, but it was just like concepts and their connections are the link between our prior knowledge and new situations. So why not train our young people to identify those concepts and be able to access these new situations? So all of you, even if you've never heard of this leak that's happening in Florida, you were able to access it through all of those concepts that you are putting into chat. And so those are the type of moves that we want our young people to make. So let's compare these two classrooms. This is like how I used to teach and now how I teach. So I'm a social studies teacher. So I thought, okay, what about, the stock market crash, looking at modern world history? We examine why it happened, the lessons learned from the stock market crash. Next, I'm going to teach about the Great Depression. I'm going to have students understand the major causes and consequences on people's daily lives. And then we're going to study World War II. And I want my young people to look for the significance of events and making comparisons to our world today. So those are the types of things that I used to do. So how would I transform this? Compare it to Classroom B and let us know in chat, what do you notice about the difference between Classroom A and Classroom B? So in Classroom B, students begin by exploring the concepts of self-determination, institutions, systems, and power. They determine the key attributes and how these concepts interact in their daily lives. They look for self-determination, institutions, systems, and power, and how they play out in these contexts: the stock market crash, the Great Depression, and World War II. Then they choose a modern challenge, such as systemic racism, the economy, or political polarization, and they look for self-determination, institutions, systems, and power, and use what they learned from the unit to make recommendations for solutions. They do one together as a class, then they work in small groups on a chosen challenge, any challenge that they want. So go ahead and put into chat, what are you noticing? I'm seeing some people already going into there. The difference between Classroom A and Classroom B. I'm just gonna play a little music as you guys put these into chat. Awesome. So many great comments coming in there. And I want to just point out to those people who are noticing that they're connecting them to these concepts to their daily lives. So we've lately been playing with human experience concepts. How can we start with human experience concepts, things that every human has experienced? They've all experienced self-determination or lack thereof. They've all experienced some sort of institution, some sort of system, some sort of power structure, even if it's in their families. They all have experience with this. So how do we start there? And then link it to those disciplinary concepts, link it to that disciplinary content that the standards might say I have to teach, and then transfer it. So it's basically acquire is this first little paragraph where they're connecting those concepts in the stock market crash, they're transferring to the Great Depression, they're transferring to World War II, and then they're transferring to a modern challenge. So there's, 4 different transfers happening in this particular unit. So that's what we're going for. I love all the things you all are putting into chat. So let's just go through some different strategies of acquire, connect, and transfer. So Kayla's going to take us through, but she's the queen of the acquire strategies. What are the ones that you want to highlight, Kayla?
Hi, yeah, I'm really going to focus on concept attainment. We have a ton of strategies though. So on the website that I keep putting in the chat, and links directly to these strategies, and we have even more that we've built out since we've created this slide. So feel free to hop in and get those, but they're great. They help students really start to dig in and see those critical attributes of the concepts that we've been talking about, and then find ways to put it in their own words and even create some non-linguistic representations to help consolidate their understanding about those concepts. But the first one I'm going to highlight is concept attainment. And this started with a 5th grade class. They were learning about physical change, and then they were going to move into chemical change. So at this point, they had already learned about physical change, and the teacher was doing this as a concept attainment just to help students see if their critical attributes applied. And so let's have some fun. Let's try to pull our prior knowledge of physical change and just put yes or no in the chat. Is this a physical change? Yes or no? A piece of paper turned into an origami swan.
We got some bright cookies going on here. Maybe
Awesome.
They're just seeing what the other people are saying.
Love it. Yes. Okay, so this was one example. And now we have a melted popsicle. It's starting to get warmer, at least where I am. I'm in Georgia. So everybody's probably seen a popsicle. Is this yes or no, physical change or chemical change? Awesome. They keep coming. All right, what about this next one? I have my ingredients, and then I've baked a German chocolate cake.
Oh, you guys had some good middle school teachers.
Look at this, yes. And so at this point, the students had never, or unless they had learned it outside of school, they had not heard the term chemical change or the concept chemical change yet. But what the teacher did after showing, and there were more examples and non-examples, she then went to a concept attainment where she introduced the term chemical change. So all of the no pictures that were in the original slide deck, then she said, okay, what do these pictures have in common? This is a chemical change. How would you describe chemical change? And so it allowed students to see the difference between a chemical change and a physical change and start creating their own working definition of the concept before she explicitly told them.
Awesome. And the same can be applied to skills. So Trevor's an English teacher, and so this is how he interpreted concept attainment. A quick example, we don't want you to read this on the slide, but we just want Trevor to explain what he did with this for a more sort of process-oriented discipline.
Yeah, so when it comes to skills, it's important that students understand what those concepts are, and then the skill is their ability to apply their understanding of that concept in a new context. So a instructional move that I'm sure every English teacher is familiar with is modeling. So one of the concept attainment strategies that I use is by modeling, in this case, a piece of persuasive writing. And as I'm going through, I'm thinking aloud about the instructional and writerly moves that I'm making to have an effective claim, as you can see in yellow, to have solid reasoning like you see in blue, and to integrate evidence effectively as you see in green. So by helping students see the critical attributes across this example and several other examples that I model for them, we help them put those ideas in those conceptual file folders. When I'm done modeling, I have them look at several examples. And then as a group, we go through, we sort of clarify what are the key attributes that make an effective claim? What are the key attributes that make for well-integrated evidence? And what are the attributes that make for sound reasoning? So students are then able to take that understanding and apply it themselves. So that's where that skill work comes in. So it's about modeling so they understand the concept, and then giving them an opportunity to apply that conceptual knowledge as a skill.
Yeah, we just love to just start with examples of whatever it is we're trying to teach. I often just go to Google Images and put the concepts in there and see what comes up, because we want students to be able to file away the critical attributes that are shared across multiple examples. And so then next step is really get them to sort of solidify that understanding. So one tool that we adapted from the Foundation for Critical Thinking, a lot of you said you're interested in critical thinking. So we adapt a lot of their tools as well as making things thinking visible, as strategies that we can use to help build conceptual understanding. So See It, or SEEI, is a way just to get students to elaborate on their understanding. And so we have a quick example from a social studies class, which is students just thinking about what is the concept of human rights. And we love to use index cards because students can put the name of the concept on one side and then fill out the SEEI or a Freyer model or something like that on the back side. And then you'll see what we do with those. Well, I guess you guys already saw with some of those sticky notes, but the students can then arrange the index cards once they've collected a series of concepts. So first we want them to acquire understanding. We really want them to know, what does human rights mean? Before we start asking them, what's the relationship between human rights and the economy? We need to make sure they really deeply understand what a human right is. And so by getting them to state, elaborate, exemplify it with their own examples, not the ones we just said, and illustrate, they're really sort of consolidating their understanding. Once they do that, we can start to connect concepts and relationship. And so that's really essentially where a lot of the deeper learning happens and where we get really excited about some of those concept mapping tools that we shared earlier. And so we're not going to go through all of these, but again, back to our website, learningthattransfers.com. All of these are on there as templates. Question stems is in all 4 books that I've written. This is my 4th book, and we put these question stems as well as an on your feet guide to learning transfer that Julia Briggs and I wrote. These question stems are on all 5 of my publications because I think that they really are essential. So here's what they are. They point students' attention to that deeper structural patterns of how the world is organized. That's why they're so powerful. That's why I keep publishing these in every single document that I publish, because I want us to see, when we ask our students, how do these concepts interact? What's the connection between this concept and this concept? They're looking for that deeper structural pattern that cognitive scientist Jerome Bruner is talking about, helping them to grasp the structure of a subject. And so we have a lot of different tools. One of them that we created in the midst of lockdown last year was this click tool. Kayla likes to call it a beefed up KWL chart, if you're familiar with that. And so we want to make sure that our young people can see how they're monitoring their thinking. So click, we want ideas to click in students' brains. And so that's where we came up with this acronym. I say we, really, it was Kayla, of concepts, list what they currently understand, what are their inquiries or their questions, what is the contextual evidence, and what is knowledge gained. And so this is a quick example from, I know we got a couple from Australia on live with us. I think it's morning time for you all. This is from a teacher who teaches in Australia. So he said, basically, what's the relationship between change, conflict, and identity? And he had the students use this as they went through several different sources. So he gave them 5 different sources to read through and analyze, but the click tool was a way for them to sort of hold all of their thinking, a way to collect all of their thinking as they were going along. So I feel like this has been one of the most favorite strategies that we created somewhat in the midst of the pandemic to help our young people really hold all of the information that we're asking them to explore, is this click tool.
So really all this is about helping students create connections in their mind and build schema. So the more context that we expose students to, the more concepts that we help them understand and integrate into their understanding. The more of these conceptual connections they have, the more schema that they'll build, and the more they'll be able to readily interpret or unlock new situations when they encounter them. So as sort of a kitschy visual of how this process looks in the brain, if there are any cognitive scientists in here, don't be too upset. This is our best representational model. So we help students understand and acquire understanding of settings by showing them a bunch of examples. We maybe go over some different ways that plots could function in different texts. And then we finally introduce them to the concept of character. So right now, students are able to identify and point out examples of settings, plots, and characters, but they maybe don't necessarily understand how they interact in a text. So if our goal is to help students not only be able to point these things out or answer them on a multiple choice test, but to be able to analyze text, they need to understand those connections. So when we help students connect those concepts in relationship, we can help them see the way that they interact so they can better, in the case of English language arts, interpret a text. So one of the stories that I had my students read last year was Lamar Giles' Black Nerd Problems. And they were able to see how authors use setting and conflict between characters to develop plot and establish theme. So once students establish that relationship, they then have to pull in evidence from the text to show that not only do they understand that in the abstract, but they also understand it in that individual text. So the generalization my students came up with was, for example, Lamar Giles uses the simple setting of a mall to create a caste system of classes, and that creates conflict among the characters trying to interact between the classes. So that shows their ability to connect those concepts in relationship, but also pull in evidence to show that they understand that individual text too.
Awesome. And so here's a way that you can even do this in PE. And this is, students were looking at balance, fitness, and choices. Those were their anchoring concepts, the really important concepts in the unit of study. And some other sub-concepts that they had also looked at were perseverance, cardiovascular fitness, enjoyment, and then also disorders. And so some of the connections that students made coming up with this were, we must have balance in our fitness routines in order to avoid disorders. We can improve our physical fitness through perseverance, especially in cardiovascular exercises, or I make fitness choices based on what brings me enjoyment, like running for cardiovascular fitness. And so this can be done in any context and any age. And it's really about getting students, give them the concepts and ask them, what connections do you see? And you'll be really amazed with the relationships and the generalizations, the statements that they bring out and that they share with you. And so our third phase of acquire, connect, and transfer is we're now going into our transfer strategies and how we can apply our understanding to new situations. And so this is one of our favorite examples. It's what concepts live here. This can be done again in any setting. You show a picture, a video, a quote, and you ask what concepts are here. And so with this example, if you would like to pop into the chat, this is a cover from The Economist, and they have great visuals that are really thought-provoking, and so they allow students to pull out their understanding. So if you would like to, go ahead and share what concepts live here. What might you see in this image?
Wow, here they come. Community, teamwork, design, trust, collaboration. Definitely, we're all in this together. Interconnectedness, resilience. I like that one with the trampoline. I feel like resilience, bounce back is like what we're seeing here. Very cool. Ecosystem. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Disease, of course. Why are we even in this situation? Someone puts. So this is all those things you guys are doing. This is the meta move we want our young people to make, is to be able to look at a situation and start to pull those concepts out and then ultimately connect those. And that's what allows students to transfer. Love it, love it, love it.
And unlock and refine is taking that a step further. So they're recognizing the concepts that apply. They're engaging their prior understanding like you all are now. You're pulling out your past knowledge and thinking of what was in that image. And then they're going to determine the extent that their prior understanding applies. So it's not just what concepts do they see, but in this new situation, I have this prior understanding of conceptual relationships. Does that understanding work in this situation, or do I have to refine my thinking and adjust my thinking based on this new situation, this new setting? And so then that's where they modify and refine. And the beautiful thing that you're all doing, I saw a question in the chat about how do you get students to do this without saying, I don't know, or I'm stuck. We didn't give you all the pictures before you came into the webinar tonight. And it's just kind of, you constantly ask, and it's these routines that you'll see in our chapter 2 of our book. It's just creating that culture. And so posing it, making it risk-free, and welcoming all perspectives and answers really helps lay that foundation to get away from, I don't know.
Awesome. So now that we're coming into the end of our webinar, and now that we've sort of laid the foundation of how do we do this sort of within one discipline, we want to go to sort of what's possible. And so it's incredible if we think about what's possible. So this storyboard was created before January 6th. This storyboard was created in October and November of last year. And so we're looking at PE. And the example anchoring concepts in this storyboard is defensive stance, player positioning, and recovery defense. Totally sports related. Defensive stance, player positioning, recovery defense. And the first context where they were connecting those concepts was football. How can they understand defensive stance, player positioning, and recovery defense in football, in American football. And then they just did a similar transfer to basketball. How can they connect those concepts in relationship to basketball? Then they went to nature and sort of what are sort of these bears and different predators and prey doing in nature with defensive stance, positioning, and recovery defense. And then they went to politics and watched a video looking at sort of defensive stance, player positioning, and recovery defense in politics. And so, yeah, this is just such a great example. We're popping into chat. You can go to either of our websites, edtosavetheworld.com or learningthattransfers.com, and see all of these. We have almost 300 of these example storyboards to people who've taken our online courses. And so where we can go with this is really, really exciting. So here's one of the most famous studies on transfer. So we'd be remiss if we didn't quickly go through this super famous study originally conducted in 1980 and replicated again. So see if you guys can see some connections to what we're saying. So researchers gave participants this sort of dilemma of a general who needed to attack a fortress. The problem was the paths, all the paths to the fortress were booby-trapped if he brought his whole entire army down that particular path. And so he needed the entire army to overcome the fortress. So if he took his entire army down any path, the booby traps would be set off and they would fail. Let's just put it that way. So how is he going to solve this problem? So they tell the participants the way he solved this problem was he divided his force up into multiple sort of smaller units that wouldn't sort of trip up the booby traps so that they could all converge upon the fortress at the same time. So I see some of you are seeing the concepts already here. So they gave a couple other sort of distractor stories. They're really scientific, and so they made sure that this was a much more scientific study than if I would have done it. So later they sort of said to them, okay, imagine you're a surgeon and you've got to operate on a tumor. The problem is, if you use the ray as strong as you needed to kill the tumor, the bad cells, we kill some of the good cells around the tumor. So what are we to do? And the idea was the young people were supposed to, or the participants in the study were supposed to transfer their learning from the fortress story to this particular story. And they were really, most participants were only able to do it if they were prompted. Hey, is there anything from this fortress story that could help you out with this surgeon story? Where they were able to see, okay, if we attack the tumor from multiple less powerful rays at the same time, the convergence of force would kill the tumor while preserving the healthier cells or tissues all around. And so that's just a quick example of how, if we would teach the young people what you all are doing here into chat, which is divide and conquer, convergence of force, diffusion of force, all of those things, they would be better able to transfer their learning. And so imagine from culturally responsive teaching in the brain, Dr. Zaretta Hammond says this: information processing through the creation of metaphors and analogies. When we make comparisons between two seemingly totally different situations, what we're doing is really making those meaningful connections more obvious. She says this: the explicit comparisons in a metaphor help students move beyond memorization to deeper comprehension. So we're teaching our young people by using analogies to look for those deeper structural patterns of how the world is organized, really leading towards more equity. And so that's the thing that we wanted to share with you all. And then when we think about innovation, Trevor brought this book into my life, The Medici Effect, which this guy, Franz Johansson, says that world-changing innovation comes when we connect the concepts from one field with the concepts from another field. And one of the classic examples in his book, The Medici Effect, is how this architect in Zimbabwe combined the concepts from termite mounds from nature. This is called biomimicry, for those of you who are familiar with it. Termite mounds and design. And how could he design a building that needed to stay constant temperature without electricity? Because termites do that with their mounds. So this is just an award-winning architect combining the concepts of termites and architecture. So imagine where we can go with this if we really think about it. And so here's my final question for you all. How do student agency, equity, innovation, and transfer interact? So I'm gonna play a little music, and I'd love for you all to put into chat. If you're watching the recording of this, just think for a minute. How do student agency, equity, innovation, and transfer interact? So go ahead. So great. You guys are really good studies. You're like concepts and their connections. Amen to that. So here's some key points that we hope you all are taking away from today. All fields of study. So someone said, what about examples for career and technical education? What about this? What about all fields of study contain a deeper structural patterns of fundamental concepts and how they interact. Concepts and their connections are the link between prior learning and new situation. This is incredible potential for harnessing students' lived experiences and promoting innovative problem solving. We can build a culture of transfer by focusing student attention on how organizing concepts and their connections play out in different situations. And finally, the ACT mental model empowers students to look for the deeper structural patterns and use their prior learning to unlock new situations. So loving all these things coming into chat. Our incredible team is on and they're answering a lot of your questions. If you want to join our extended team, we are trying to rethink everything in education, in life. And so we just really want you all to join our community if you're interested. We've got this free book study coming up in June. If you grab a copy of the book and we want to join us for this free book study, you can register for that. Of course, we've got our online courses. Our book has been trending #1 new release on Amazon in curriculum instruction. So we're super excited. We've got a Facebook group. We've got our online courses. If you put the code webinars into the coupon code spots, you can get 25% off any of our online courses. And of course, all of this is available to you in a recording. So if you're not catching all of this, don't worry. You will catch it if you watch the recording, or if you just follow us on social media. We are always sort of sharing all this stuff. Thanks to those of you who are putting things into the chat, and thanks to our wonderful team, extended team, core team, all on the chat today who are participating. So I don't know if we have any questions. I know Jeff and Margaret may have been monitoring more than we have. If there are specific questions, we've tried to answer them as we're going along.
Julie, just to let you know, you answered all the questions as you went along, so that was terrific. I don't know if anybody has anything right now, but I think we're okay. I kept an eyeball on everything, and everything was answered.
Beautiful. So we have no further ado, except for Margaret maybe to let us know who the winners are, or give us some more information on the winners for those who stayed until here.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Someone asked if you could back up one slide to the courses and dates.
Here we go.
I'll just do a few housekeeping things. So thank you so much to our presenters who so graciously gave their time to make this event available to each of us. So thank you, Julie, Kayla, and Trevor. And then just a few reminders. This webinar was recorded. The recording and your certificate of attendance will be sent via email in the next few days, as well as the link to the book study, as you see up there, that will be starting in June. And then please visit corwin.com/webinars to register for some of our upcoming webinars. And now the 2 lucky winners of a copy of Learning That Transfers are Ibaduni Osander, and Evelyn Shepard. And we will be in touch via email to get your copy to you. So congratulations. And if you were not one of our winners, you can still purchase Learning Net Transfers on Corwin.com and use the code webinars, that's in all caps, to receive free shipping along with your 20% discount. Thank you for everyone. Thank you to everyone for spending the time with us tonight. And thank you again to Julie, Kayla, and Trevor.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.